So once again, just like there are things that affect the demand curve that we studied, there are going to be things that cause supply to shift as well. So remember, the supply curve, just like the demand curve, shows how price affects quantity supplied, other things equal. And in this lecture, we want to know what those other things are. And recall, other things are non-price determinants of supply. We also call these supply curve shifters. So our first supply curve shifter is going to be a change in input prices. So in the case of coffee, the inputs are going to be things like coffee beans, labor, water. In general, inputs are the things you need to produce the output. So an increase in input prices, this is going to shift supply to the left or decrease supply, right? So as the input prices increase, the profitability of each unit of the good is going to decrease, right? Since the costs of producing that is increasing. So graphically, if this is our supply curve, once input prices increase, we're going to shift back like this. Alternatively, a decrease in input prices is going to shift supply to the right. Right, because as input prices decrease, each unit of the good you're producing is more profitable. And graphically, we're going to see a shift like this. The second supply curve shifter we want to consider is technology. And technology matters because it determines how many inputs are required to produce an output. So as technology increases or becomes more advanced, that typically means production requires fewer inputs. If you want to think about automation and robots, that means you require less labor. And so as technology increases, your cost per unit decreases. And this is equivalent to a fall or decrease in input prices. Which means supply increases or shifts right. Graphically, this is supply. Once technology increases, we shift to the right. So the next shifter we want to consider is the number of sellers. And remember, the market supply curve is the sum of all individual sellers' supply curves. So as you add an additional seller to the market, you add their individual supply curve to the market, which shifts the market supply curve over to the right. So as number of sellers increases, supply shifts right. And then finally, number 4 is expectations. So an example is if sellers expect oil prices to increase, then they're going to reduce supply now so that they have more to sell later at the higher prices. So I did this with demand, and I'll do it with supply as well because it's important. If we have a price, P1, we can trace that over to the supply curve and down to get Q1. And remember, this is the quantity supplied. And this curve here is the supply, or the supply curve, right? And changes in price affect the quantity supplied, but not the supply itself. So recall all the things we just talked about. We have input prices, technology, number of sellers, and expectations. These are all things that shift supply, and price, quantity supplied, but not supply. So that's it for supply. The next lecture, we will put demand and supply together to talk about equilibrium.